Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you're all doing well and energized after your third cup of coffee. Um, our speaker for the day is Muralidharan Ramachandran, or as we affectionately call him, Murli. Murli has 30 years of experience as a technologist and a leader. He's played every single leadership role from a CEO, CTO, CIO, and an advisor to a whole bunch of companies, including our very own. For those who know him, Murli is also an intellectual on emerging technologies. And as today's topic suggests, he will captivate us with deep insights about generative AI. Please welcome Murli to the stage.
Hey, hi, Nikhil.
Hi,
Good
Murli.
afternoon, everybody. Pleasure to be on this show.
Great. So happy to have you, Murli. So, just to set the context, the generative AI Odyssey, a deep dive into an enterprise's journey. It's a very futuristic sounding topic with a big throwback to the past. But what we're really trying to do is understand uh, how enterprises should understand generative AI itself. We'll talk about what makes certain problem areas more relevant to be tackled with generative AI, what to expect from these technologies when you start using them, and what the future holds for these technologies. With that in mind, let's kick off the questions. So, starting with Murli, you've had so many years of experience working with so many companies, especially in the deep tech space. More recently, you've been advising companies in the deep tech space. Uh, in your experience, what kind of enterprise problems are more ripe for disruption with the help of generative AI? Where should you be using generative AI?
Thanks, Nikhil, for this question. Again, pleasure to everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and pleasure to be on this show. I think generative AI, is really a great technology. Obviously, as Monish presented it, AI is now not something new. It's been here for the last 70, 80 years. But a lot of the adoption has kicked off today with a lot of accessibility, computing resources and other things, which has made it much more, I would say, relevant. I would say, or commercially exploitable today. I would say, right? Just the context of what Munish had said. Very clearly, the way I look at it from an enterprise perspective, and again, maybe I'll set a little bit more context here between Chat GPT and also the enterprise side of this. Obviously, Chat GPT, which has been here for the last couple of years from 2018 onwards, when the first version of Chat GPT was announced. Right? Chat GPT is a large language model which has been trained with huge amount of data, which is not available in the public space. Right? But when you really have to adopt it in the enterprise environment, the data set is then limited to what can you get within your enterprise, right? It's not public information that you can really use. Maybe to some limited extent, in some use cases, you could use some amount of data, especially if you're using this technology around market research or getting some information, public information of competition analysis and some of those things is something that you could use. But a large amount of use cases typically has to be relevant within the enterprise. From an industry perspective, I think there is no single industry that can be left out. There are use cases that is applicable across industries, and as we speak along, I will give out some use cases or some examples of where we could potentially have that, so that it becomes a little bit more easier for us to understand where it is. But more importantly, I think the biggest thing that we have to keep in mind is this data set that we talked about, right? So coming specifically to certain industries that we can really look at, financial services, a huge amount of opportunities that is there. I have certainly seen examples of how generative AI has been used to look at analyzing huge amount of unstructured and structured data, and in creating also unstructured content. Now, in terms of probably a contract which needs to be rewritten. Okay, you have a contract existing, no contract that needs to be studied, it needs to be rewritten and other things. So those are some of the use cases that are there, right? It could be also in terms of, let's say, areas like trade finance, where you could have documents like your bank guarantees, your letter of credits, remittances, so many
Mhm.
use cases that are there in trade finance. Now, these are all leading to a lot of unstructured data, which is there, which actually can be used very, very effectively. You can use a lot of these unstructured information, get a context to it, and really help. One thing that you have to keep in mind, obviously, when you use a lot of these use cases, you also have to keep relevance to the fact that this has to be uh, human in the loop. I would not advocate that it can be straight through end-to-end processing on day one, because typical of all AI models, it takes time to learn because ChatGPT has been trained to work on a lot of those things. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. Now, these are passing remarks. Now, similarly, there are other industries as well where this can be extensively used. Healthcare is one area, again, where there can be huge amount of use cases. Use cases like improved patient or member onboarding,
Mhm.
okay, is one area where there is a huge amount of opportunities. Clinical coding, transcription, okay, again, these are things where you need to understand the data and create those description reports. Those are all manual, pretty much manual today, using transcribers and other things. Now, this is where clinicians can actually do that, or if this can help, at least again with the human in the loop element, you can actually get that done, and then get it supported by some sort of a verification or something of that sort, right? So those are something that can be done. Another industry from a tech perspective is the software industry, where there is a lot of revolution happening around coding itself, right?
Mhm.
Now, again, there are different types of things that we can look at. One is obviously writing, available code which is there to write anything which is there. Another area where, since a lot of digital transformation that is happening is also associated with a lot of legacy code in the software industry, we do a lot of refactoring of applications, right? When
Mhm.
the entire refactoring that is there, where you're converting legacy code, maybe in one programming languages, to some of the new microservices based architecture code. Now, these are things where, again, a typical refactoring would take a huge amount of time, and this was an inhibitor also for digital transformation, because you also have to deal with legacy. There are quite a few use cases that we can use in terms of how this could be leveraged significantly to drive a lot of these things. Now, I can keep going on and on and on. So no, I think that maybe I'll take a pause and maybe see if there are some questions, and we'll take it accordingly.
No, that's wonderful, Murli. I want to double click on a couple of things that you mentioned. One, you heavily spoke about generative AI being great for unstructured content. What about content which is semi-structured or completely structured? Do you think generative AI is overkill in those places, or it should be used in the place of more traditional big data techniques as well?
Absolutely. That's a huge amount of opportunity, structured or unstructured, doesn't
Right.
matter. It's
Okay.
just that probably unstructured is just a little bit more human based today.
Hmm.
Structured, you could actually do a little bit more of even automation technologies. Now, they all form within the overall umbrella of what is there. But typically when you're talking about generative, since we are
Yeah.
specifically talk about generative, it's also about creating new content based on contextual analysis. So anything that you're looking at structured data and you want to create an output out of it. Look at, let's say, an investment banking
Hmm.
company, right? They have to analyze, probably say, I would not say semi-structured data around balance, no, let's say annual reports. Now, if you need to read annual reports of different companies, which are not exactly the same structure, but then there is some amount of structure or semi-structured data around that. And see, these annual reports would probably be a couple of hundred pages,
Yeah.
right? Now, what you need from an investment banking perspective or an investor perspective is a call out of insights out of that data, which runs into pages. Now, those are things that are certainly use cases that can be generated.
Excellent. Another thing that you had mentioned was around coding and the disrupting legacy code. This sounds like music to so many ears, but the question does come up: how good is the code output of generative AI created code? Can you use the code directly? Is it good enough to be production ready?
So anything like typical of all AI models, it takes time to train. Now, obviously, coding is just not about generating code. It's also about ensuring that you follow the right coding standards that companies follow. While there could be generic things that would be available, there are also standards which are specific to every customer or
Right.
every environment. So these things takes time to train. So that's why, as I said, I would still say we are still in very early days as far as AI is concerned, generative AI is concerned. So I would still say that it is more of an assisted model rather than end-to-end model. So my recommendation or my suggestion or what I have seen in the limited experience that we have with this technology, is still only a couple of years old, is really to look at it from a perspective of assisted model, where at least rather than writing from scratch, you have some level of code that is there and you just do some sort of checks and maybe corrections that may be required. And then obviously, typically like in any AI model, another thing that we need to keep in mind that it will keep improving over a period of time, right? You start with the model with a certain level of confidence or accuracy or whatever you want to mention about it. And then as it learns by itself, on its own, it learns over a period of time, it gets more and more accurate. Now, to what level you could get it, it depends on the environment. It will be very difficult to say whether it will stop at 95% or a 98% or 100%. That's obviously we'll have to really look at it as time progresses.
Awesome. So again, you're just giving me so many rabbit holes to go in, and I could go very deep on the technology side. But just so that businesses understand and to give them a little bit of context around what you mean by accuracy. One, what do you mean by accuracy? And secondly, what do you mean by how do you measure the success of generative AI from a numbers standpoint?
So when you really okay, accuracy, since you asked about accuracy is one of the success factors. So maybe let me look at the broader context of success factors. So obviously success factors is something that you see eventually for any investment in technology, you need to associate it with some sort of a measurable output. So obviously those are the metrics or the KPIs that you would set in any project or any initiative that you embark upon. Right. So this is where you really set up some of the things. When you say accuracy percentage, it would say about, let's say, if you're extracting certain information and giving insights or generating some output, in terms of an output, maybe a report or anything of that sort. So obviously, since it takes time for it to train, you need to look at whether it has interpreted it correctly. Now, there could be some challenges, and maybe we should at some point of time even talk about some of the challenges that we have with this technology, because end of the day, as a technology, this has got a lot of benefit, but does have a lot of challenges as well. And that's where we need to be a little bit careful. So accuracy is one of the measures that could be there. In any AI model, obviously you have two options. One is go through straight to processing. Now, if you were to do a robotic process automation, obviously you would do a straight through processing based on those use cases that are very well, they are absolutely manual, repetitive and other things. But here, since we are talking about also some amount of unstructured content and insights, here is where we also need to probably look at one more score, which is what I call as confidence level. So the AI model, if you could look at a confidence model, it could help you decide, and based on the risk appetite of an organization. Now, let me give you a use case of what I've seen one of the company startups doing in this space. They actually help companies automate or speeden up the entire bank guarantee issuance process.
Okay.
Right now, when you look at it today, if a customer goes to a bank and requests for a bank guarantee to be issued, they take about 5 days. Now, actually, it doesn't take 5 days. It's a highly unstructured document. It is just that the analysts who are working on the bank guarantee need to look at a lot of elements before they approve it. Right? Because there could be, discrepancies, in terms of, let's say, amount or anything, or dates or something of that sort. There could be there could be onerous clauses that could be there, especially if there are legal terms and conditions associated with such use cases like contracts and other things, right? Now, this is where you could build in some sort of a confidence score into the model. There are models available which can give you that confidence score. And then based on your risk appetite, you can also take a say that if the confidence score is more than 95%, okay, I can still let it go through a straight through processing route. And if it is less than 50, okay, this is what I need. If it is less than 60, maybe I do need to a two-level check. So you can actually create your business rules based on some of these confidence scores. And as I said, typically you may start with a lower level of accuracy and confidence score on the day you probably go live on day one after your pilot and other things. Over a period of time with machine learning models and models that trains itself, these things keep going up, which basically helps you improve the overall ROI of the investment that you make in this technology.
That's very, very interesting.
Similarly, there could be other metrics, like, time to complete, okay. ROI. And obviously, those are typical standard metrics which are there, which would be there for any investments that you do in technology or selection of any technology that you do.
Understood. But for generative AI specifically, if you want to have a blanket metric, it should be accuracy and confidence scores, and that can vary from industry to industry.
Yes, it can vary. And of course, the use case, the complexity, because again, what happens is in AI, basically, it is all basically learning based on the data that you present.
Right.
Now, global public data, you have tons and tons of data available, but what happens is even in an enterprise data, you may not have the depth or the variety that is there. You may actually land up training on a few varieties that may not be able to pick up certain other varieties or certain other, I would say, workflow scenarios, which may not operate at the same level of accuracy or confidence level.
I understand. So, given that these models should be improving over a period of time, I believe the term for this is fine-tuning, as generic as it sounds. How does one fine-tune this data? Does the company have to invest its own manpower to do it, or can you actually program the generative AI to improve on its own?
As I said, see, typically the best case scenario is where you could look at your variety and obviously pre-train. Obviously, typically the process that is followed by any industry is obviously first is you choose the right models that are relevant to your use case that is there. Once you have that, you do a first level of training using some of the samples that you do. Then obviously you try and see how much the system has learned based on the samples that you have done. And this is where you need to choose the right set of samples. As I said, at least you need to ensure that you cover as far as possible all the varieties or major varieties that are there, which at least gives you some level of confidence and accuracy level to start with. You obviously then run some true online use cases, see what is the level of accuracy and confidence that you're there. Then you actually reflect on that data. And then if you see that there are certain use cases or certain scenarios, okay, or situations where you're not seeing the level of confidence and accuracy that you want to take before you go live, you add more samples and train it, right? So this is, you actually go through a couple of iterations. That's a real life scenario. It works perfectly fine to do a pilot with the first sample and training that happens. And that's an iterative process. What I have seen is, of course, depending on the complexity, it may change as to what is the time it would require. But typically, it takes at least a couple of months of training the model till you get to a level of comfort, let's say around 80% or 85%, where you think, okay, this is somewhere I can go live pretty reasonably. And then over a period of time, it learns on its own, and then the accuracy and confidence level increases. Obviously, that's how the whole model works.
Right. So sort of putting some of the thoughts together of what you've said just before and now, it seems like if companies want to adopt a generative AI, it should be a stage gate method, or rather they should have very strong protocols in place of how you keep checking what the AI is giving you. and not just start using it straight away. Or if you are using it straight away, only at a very, very high confidence level do you put one level of, it's a threshold based protocol of work that you do. Extremely interesting. So, one of the big places where we have been seeing the use of generative AI is media. And I know you mentioned healthcare and a lot of other, and banking as places which can be disrupted. What are some of your most interesting use cases that either you're working on right now that are adjacent to what you're working on, or things that you've seen in the industry, which are just over and above, or they even can be in the creative space?
Yeah, I think that in the creation space, obviously, media you can generate a lot of content,
Right.
right? Whether it is blogs, social media content writing, right? So these are another couple of places where there is huge amount of interest that is there, okay, that we can actually use it, and some of these things can also actually use um, data available in the public GPT model, right? In the public model, so you could use a combination of it because some of the blogs would be a combination of what you want to do it from the enterprise as well as something that you would want to use it from the public space, right? To get content towards it and then do your own interpretation of it and get this done. So I think that is something that is possible. Another area where we are seeing a lot of, at least I'm hearing a lot of things, to be honest enough. I have not personally interacted much in the media side or been in the media side, but if you really look at it, area around graphic designing, video marketing, right? Now, these are again areas where there are huge amount of potential or huge amount of interest uh, that is there in the use of generative AI, right? I think these are there from the media perspective, and of course, there are other use cases in some of the other places as well, and we could talk about it as well as we move along, around where these things could be used outside of, let's say, the first set of healthcare or financial services that we talked about, right? Or
Right.
another area is because customer experience. Now customer experience is, it is across industries, and it's more of a horizontal platform, just not specific to an industry, right?
Exactly.
So,
Yeah.
so there are horizontal use cases around customer experience, right? So all of us, so we have seen the evolution of customer experience from, and I know I'm involved in a couple of industries personally, where in the customer experience space, like when we all have voice calls, talking to an agent and other things, right? Now, today there are use cases where an agent is able to get real-time insights around two, three things, around the sentiment analysis of what is the current mood of the customer who is speaking, right? AI around some of these things helps the agent basically fine tune the response that he or she needs to make to ensure that the customer satisfaction or customer experience is at the highest level, right?
Very interesting.
Identifying an irate customer or identifying where the customer is basically. Okay, one is, some things are very easy when somebody is irate and expressing it very vocally, but there are sometimes you don't really do that based on the tone of the message, right? So some of these things are things that helps. It also helps enterprises who are in the customer experience space even out or balance out variations that may happen from one agent to another. You are neutralizing that threat. Otherwise, obviously, the empathy factor, these are all individual traits which differs from an agent to agent or
Of
from
course.
a customer to customer, from both sides, right? Both sides of the table who are actually interacting in a particular discussion. And that's where something that it can really help.
Very interesting. So again, to double click on a couple of things, especially on media, I've personally played around with Dribble and Canva AI, and they're really fascinating the way they're creating. It's still got a few ways to go. It is very interesting. And regarding the customer experience, if you can club all of it as professional services, that becomes really interesting because one of the first examples that Monish talked about was a 1960s tool called Eliza, which was a chatbot. I think it was for therapy. And these kind of tools are disrupting professional services in a big way, where you are moving towards a value based you might have to move towards a value-based economy rather than just the proof of work-based economy. So that's really, really interesting. There's a big,
Yes,
big
sir.
foundational impact of this technology. The last set of questions that I have is basically around what's next for generative AI. We're already seeing it grow at a breakneck speed, but we don't know where this is going because it is moving too fast. People who had started predicting what would be the future of generative AI, we're already seeing that future come to life today. So even if I have to, push you to give me 2 months to 4 months ahead, where is generative AI going?
Okay, maybe before I answer that question, maybe I thought it would be relevant to maybe just discuss, spend a couple of minutes around some of the challenges of generative AI,
Absolutely,
because
absolutely.
because that's going to be a critical, because what next will be around resolving a lot of those challenges that are there, right? So if
Great.
you really look at it, some of the things, one of the things that we need to consider from a generative AI perspective is, or some of the key things that you need to keep in mind are around mitigating unconscious bias that is there in the data
Hmm.
set, right? Because many a times, because of the sample data that is given, it sort of interprets data in that based on the sample that is given. Now, these things can actually lead to a lot of other issues, okay, that needs to be taken into account. Now, just to give a data point here, that is some of the recent research that talked about this particular element, talks about at least 65% of enterprises experience data bias as one of the challenges that they need to fix.
Wow.
Okay, so this is something that we need to keep in mind. The
Hmm.
second is, of course, but at the same time, it's also interesting to see that 66% of the enterprises are relying on AI ML models for decision making.
Okay.
Okay, so this is also a good sign. So if you really look at it, you need to do the balancing act, right? On one
Hmm.
hand, you have the headwinds, and the other hand, you have the tailwind, which is actually pushing you there.
Hmm.
Right, so therefore getting your handle around this is extremely important, because obviously there are complexities around it,
Right.
especially if it becomes something which is around areas of individual preferences, taste, ethnicity, race, religion, and all those which has to be very, very cognizant about, right? I think that's one thing which has to be very, very clear. The second is, if you really look at it, is from a perspective that um, what we call as hallucination of
Okay.
AI, right?
Ah,
Because what
yes.
happens is sometimes when you really look at this data, because the way AI models are built, right? You can actually train it in a way that it can start speaking what you want to do, and that can create a hallucination effect. So we need to be very clear from an enterprise perspective about what is it that you do. Okay. The third element is, there are various AI models. So it's extremely important, therefore, that you pick up the right AI model that is relevant to the use case. Otherwise, obviously, there could be challenges around this, because there could be, the biases could be a little bit much higher than what you think which is there. And that can actually also create a lot of other challenges. The fourth thing that you need to keep in mind is around the entire thing of regulatory compliance. See, now with a lot of this privacy laws coming in, of course, in India also, we now have the digital data protection act coming in, which is enacted. So now a lot of these things also need to be a little take care of, right? So there is this entire concept which is around ethics
Hmm.
that comes in, AI ethics. So therefore, it's also extremely important that we look at how is it that the ethics is followed, what sort of governance is there within the
Right.
organization. Right now, I can actually say one thing, maybe before jumping on to the what is future, maybe just for the benefit of the viewers here, but a simple thing, if you really want to go on an AI journey, you need to go through multiple steps. First is the team which is working on it has to get educated and trained on what are the AI models that are there. The second is, obviously you need to identify a business need. You need to identify the right use case at least to start with before you embark on this. The third thing is around data management. You need to ensure that to eliminate all this bias and other things that we talked about, ensure that you have a good data management strategy around it. The fourth part of it would be the tech preparation. Now, bringing in the right tool and other things. The fifth would be ethical and regulatory constraints or considerations, which you have to take in mind, because that is something that you may not fall in the wrong side of the law. So that's something that you need to take care. Once you do that, then you get into employee training, choosing, if you are going to work with a partner, choose the right partner, plan out the budget so that you have the ROI and other things, develop an overall strategy, and then you obviously implement and monitor. If you go through these steps, obviously you could condense this a little bit into, I talked about 8-9 steps, but obviously we could look at a 4-5 step model or whatever it is. So this is something that we have to keep in mind. Now, the way I look at it from a perspective of what is there in the roadmap from a future perspective, I see a huge amount of use cases around some of the things that we talked about, code generation, media that we talked about. A lot of these things improving. A lot of people improving the overall data sets and other things, especially from an enterprise perspective. A lot of focus would be around how do we eliminate this bias and some of these areas, because that's what I see as potential areas that would be a point of focus for most of the enterprises.
Right. Very interesting. Um, yeah, I would actually want just a one-on-one session with you on those 9 steps of how we actually execute this for so many of our clients from your perspective, or at least it's absolutely wonderful. So coming back to the last question that I had, uh, the next step for generative AI. Now, say enterprises become mature enough to start adopting these generative AI practices, these set of protocols with 8-9 steps to start onboarding generative AI. Currently, they're still using it for just 1 or 2 types of use cases. It is to generate content or to review content and make it better. What happens next? Once you've reached this level and this becomes a bit more ubiquitous, what comes next for generative AI?
So there are two things, right? One obviously is uh, scaling up what you have done. So for a particular use case, you typically always start with a pilot.
Right.
You start with a pilot that is there on a small data set or a small LOB or a line of business within your organization. So one thing would I always look at it as, one is the horizontal scalability, the other is the vertical scalability.
Right.
Right. So one is the vertical scalability addresses how your successful pilot scales up to make it as an enterprise platform.
Right.
Okay, from what you start from a single line of business who is ready to put their neck out to experiment and participate in the pilot. So how do you do it? And of course, associated with that would be this entire element of organizational change management and I think it's just not only a technology scale up, right? It's also about entire change management. How do you really make that successful and other things? The other things would be the horizontal scalability, where you start now, start adopting it to multiple use cases, additional use cases that we bring in. And typically in large enterprises, again, maybe a good comment, we didn't speak much about startups and other things. Maybe you can just touch upon it as a last point. So from an large enterprises perspective, it's about vertical and horizontal scalability, where you're actually looking at how can you replicate this, how do you celebrate those successes, get more people and more people get educated, they learn about success, they come out with ideas. See, end of the day, it's all about how is it that you create innovation within the organization by participation from all enterprise stakeholders. It's just not the technology team or the data science which does that. They can be an enabler, but obviously there has to be buy-in from the business. So that's where is one part of it which is there. But when you start coming into small and medium enterprises and startups, now there are huge amount of startups coming up, right, who are solving point problems. Right now, enterprises have an opportunity to do that. Now, either you go obviously large enterprises would want to have their own teams to a large extent because they could be able to afford to scale and build their own team. But if you look at SMBs and startups, there are a lot of opportunities for these companies to basically leverage the solution that they produce. A startup, for example, may be a point solution of, let's say, a startup focusing on intelligent documents.
Right.
okay, or a startup focusing on, let's say, I would say, workflow management.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, using generative AI. Now, these are all startups that is there. So organizations have opportunities to work with these point solutions because they have a trained model, they have a model which is quick to deploy. All you need is the local training that is there. At least the models are all built, tested. So you or a customer service module, right? Now, those are opportunities that they do, and that's one of the steps that I said, right? Choosing a
Yeah.
partner.
Right.
So that's one of the steps. When you choose a partner, you pick and choose, which are the partners I want to work with for which use cases, and really drive this overall adoption.
Excellent. Excellent. Fascinating, Murli. I could talk to you for hours just learning about what your everything that you know. It's absolutely amazing how much information you have about this, especially on around the AI governance. The next time we bring you on, we would love to talk to you more about how do companies actually build an AI policy and a strategy to integrate it within the technology strategy. That itself requires more than an hour
Yes,
to
absolutely.
talk about, and we will definitely have that at some point in the future as well. Thank you so much for your time. To the audience, I hope that was as fascinating for you it was as it was for me. I was absolutely riveted. Thank you so much, Murli, for your time. It was wonderful. We have a couple of poll questions to the right. They're published, I believe. Yes, they are. I encourage everyone to start participating in them. Just a couple of questions, and and it'll be very, very useful for all. We will sort of showcase our solutions, everyone's responses a little down the line. And for now, thank you all very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Patel.